Okay, I think we're gonna get started. So again, welcome to this webinar titled Celebrating 5 Years of Storytelling and Stories. My name is Andrew McDonald. I am the Operations Manager at MALA, Muslim American Leadership Alliance, joined today by Ahmed Flex Omar, who is the Deputy Director and Chief Experience Officer at MALA, as well as Zainab Khan, who is Executive Director with MALA. We're also fortunate to be joined by Amy Tardif, who is our partner at StoryCorp, and John Fenn from the American Folklife Center. We're here basically because MALA is this year celebrating 5 years of collecting stories and sharing stories of American Muslims and their journeys. And we thought a great way to celebrate would be to gather with, two of our most sort of integral, earliest, most important partners and talk about really what the storytelling process looks like, how we go from speaking to somebody about their story to archiving those stories to sharing those stories. So I just want to welcome everybody who is able to join us. Thank you. And I'm going to first give our panelists the opportunity to introduce themselves and say a little bit about their work. Amy, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Good afternoon. I am the regional manager of the Chicago Story Booth, which is one of 3 booths around the country. There's one in Atlanta, and there's one in New York City, and there are also a few mobile booths that are Airstream trailers that travel around the country. In normal times, we have a recording space, a listening exhibit, and office space at the Chicago Cultural Center across the street from the Bean in the Chicago Loop. So StoryCorps' mission is basically to preserve and share humanity's stories, to build connections between people and create a more just and compassionate world. And we do this to remind each other of our shared humanity, strengthen and build connections between people, and to teach the value of listening. And at the same time, we're creating this invaluable archive for future generations at the Library of Congress, which you'll hear about in a minute. And our relatively new online archive we'll also talk about soon. We've typically recorded about 600 public and private interviews every year since opening in 2013 in Chicago. Myself and facilitators, outreach engagement associates Mary Bess Sear and Rocio Santos spend much of our time partnering with Chicago's marginalized communities and facilitating recordings with them, and as well as our local NPR station WBEZ, which broadcasts our edited stories on Fridays.
Thank you, Amy. John, do you want to say a few words about yourself and your work?
Sure. My name is John Fenn. I'm the head of research and programs at the American Folklife Center in the Library of Congress. I've been there just over 3.5 years, and one of the first things I had the privilege of working on was an event with MALA and StoryCorps, which we'll talk about again in a little bit. The American Folklife Center was formally established by an act of Congress in 1976 called the American Folklife Preservation Act, and that set us up to preserve and present folklife in all its diversity in the United States and beyond. So our collections certainly focus on the United States, but expand around the world, and we have primary source documents around traditional culture and identity that include oral history interviews, and so that we're a repository for StoryCorps, which I'll talk about in a second as well, but that's a key element of what we do. We are, as Amy said, in normal times, our reading room is open 8 to 5:30 Monday through Friday, and we're always there to take people's questions. Now it's all remote for the time being, but we're still there. So the library's still there for people, the Folklife Center's still there, and I'm hoping to hear from a bunch of people after this event.
Thank you so much, John. Flex, do you want to say a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Ahmed Flex Omar. I'm the co-founder, deputy director, CXO of MALA, the Muslim American Leadership Alliance, and been with MALA since the start. As Biggie, Notorious B.I.G. would say, it was all a dream, and now here we are, 5 years later celebrating our anniversary. I wish we could be celebrating in better times, but nevertheless, it's important to acknowledge these milestones because everything that we've done was through community engagement. It was all through grassroots efforts. The organization, the non-for-profit, was never about me or my co-founders or about our board of directors. It was about our community, and till today it's community driven, and we've been able to still engage with the community online, even during a pandemic. So it really shows the strength of the brand and the engagement. So I'm really excited today to talk about our journey thus far. So I'm gonna let Zainab introduce herself next. Sorry, Andrew, I know you're the moderator.
Awesome. Go for it, Zainab.
Hi, I'm Zainab Khan, and I am the executive director and one of the co-founders for MALA, the Muslim American Leadership Alliance. We're a 501c3. We're a nonprofit that's non-political and non-theological. And we have been navigating the space for the past 5 years, focused on arts, culture, heritage, and storytelling. Our first partnership and program really was Muslim American Journeys, and still continues to be so, where we have been able to collect over 800 stories from Muslim Americans all across the United States, over 55 different nationalities. We have had stories that came from first to fourth generation Muslim Americans, converts, Orthodox, Sunni, Shia, secular, however people want to identify as with their Muslim heritage. And when we started this organization, it was really to dispel stereotypes and create a platform for showcasing the diversity of Muslim Americans, which I'll talk a little bit about. But it's been a phenomenal journey to partner with StoryCorps and the American Folklife Center and the National Library of Congress. And now more than ever, our stories and our voices need to be heard. And we are recording virtually. So that's going to be kind of towards the end, where we can kind of share with everybody how you can get involved and how you can be able to share your story with MALA and StoryCorps. And it's just, I'm really excited about this panel. So thank you so much for including me, Andrew.
Oh, our pleasure. This is very exciting. I think we've been preparing for this panel for weeks, and every time we meet to prep as panelists, we're all like, this is just going to be really fun. It's going to be informative in all of this, but at the end of the day. So I know I've been really looking forward to this also. And Zainab, I actually want to come right back to you because I want to start this off with just a little bit of context of kind of how, first of all, because, we're celebrating 5 years of MALA, and a little bit of context, if you could talk a little bit about how the organization came together, and then also how that partnership with StoryCorp was initiated. And
of course. And that's such an interesting story on its own. So I've been a fan of NPR and WBZ and StoryCorp since its inception. The stories would make me laugh. They would make me cry. And in 2014, I lost my father. And we had come up with the concept of MALA, but we didn't formally launch it until 2015. And I kept thinking, I'm like, it would have, if I just had that opportunity to record his story. He was an Afghan immigrant who had such a, tremendous, amazing journey. And I've been able to share with StoryCorps his journey and how it has affected me, which was so profound. But because I had never been in that storytelling position, I'm always listening on the other end. I've never been a storyteller, but we came up with the idea to present StoryCorps with the concept of Muslim American Journeys. At that time, there was a different director, and we didn't even have a website up at that time. We just had a PDF of some written narratives, and I'm like, Flex and I would go in and we shared the written stories that we've had, and we're like, it would be incredible if we could use this booth and just record stories and share stories from our community. And so our first story was in, I believe, August of 2015. And I remember I actually wore the same blazer when I was doing my first interview because of the StoryCorp photo. And it was a young man from Afghanistan that, you know, was taught in a schoolroom in the mountains outside, and now is completing his PhD at University of Boston in cultural anthropology. And he was a recipient of the Nelson Mandela Award. And it's just looking back at some of these stories that we've done, it just made me realize that there's just so many more narratives and stories that we have yet to uncover. And that's really how we started. We started by recording stories from our neighbors, from people within our network, within our community. Many of the stories got aired on NPR and WBEZ platforms. And since then, fast forward 5 years, we are now at tipping over 800 stories. Collection has also been shared internationally in Madrid and Barcelona as an example of showcasing how fluid identities and Muslims across the world can be able to share their stories, and how storytelling can be bridge building for so many people and communities. So this has just been an incredible journey in itself. And that's how we really started, was just pitching the idea to Storycorps Chicago. And like, hey, we have an amazing community and we'd like to share our stories. What do you think of archiving and collecting Muslim American journeys? And here we are.
That's wonderful. And Amy, I want to come to you in a second to talk sort of about the process. But I actually think, Flex, I'm curious because you are MALA's sort of Chicago contingent at the moment and have been for some time. And I know you were spending like a lot of time in the story booth, especially early on. I'm curious, like, what was it like those first few recordings, that first year of doing recordings? Like, what were your first impressions of sort of the process? Are there any interviews that stick out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my first interview landed on NPR, which was really, really cool. And I don't have a journalism, background, and I found myself in a professional audio booth sitting in front of a gentleman who's an author, Ibo Patel, and I actually read his entire book before the interview. And I remember distinctly him getting up and saying, "Well, if you read my book, then you have all the information you need." So that was my introduction to StoryCorp recordings. But it was incredible because his story focused on him. I think the title was "Growing Up Wanting to Be White." And, him really going over his, beautiful journey of self-discovery, including meeting the Dalai Lama. So that was just a magical experience, for me. And as I kept recording, more stories, there were folks that I've known for 10 years, 15 years. And in 30 minutes and 45 minutes, I started to learn a lot more, about them and their journeys. And so it really strengthened my relationships with my own community. And because we went really deep, outside of, the stuff that's in the surface. So it was just incredibly rewarding, and I just couldn't get enough of it. And I would, email Amy and the team and, constantly schedule out, as many, spots as I could, get to interview people. I was just having a lot of fun. I'm still having a lot of fun.
Awesome. Yeah, I know. And even now, and we'll get into this later, but we're all, Zainab, Flex, and I each are doing virtual storytelling interviews. And we're always like, I feel like we're always, Amy, like bombarding you with emails trying to schedule the next story. I'm sorry, but Amy's awesome and loves to help us schedule stories. So we really appreciate that. I'd like to actually, just since we're going to start sort of talking about these stories, this sort of interview style, I'd like to play a brief kind of audio clip that we've put together that's sort of a compilation of a few earlier stories that we did. And then Amy, afterwards, I'd love if you could talk a little bit about StoryCorps' sort of approach to storytelling, and also your sort of own perspective on this partnership. So I'm going to run this, and fingers crossed the audio works. We tested it, so it should be fine.
I was born in Algeria. My parents were elementary school teachers from Syria who during the post-independence period in Algeria taught Arabic in Algeria. So I was born there, and then we went back to Syria, and I was raised in Syria, went to school there and to medical school in Damascus University. I graduated from Damascus University Medical School in 1988 and came right after that to Chicago. I was first in class in medical school, and I remember that I gave the graduation speech on behalf of the big class. We had about 550 people who graduated. And among the graduates at that time was someone whose name was Bashar al-Assad, who was the son of the president of Syria at that time, Hafez al-Assad. Hafez ruled Syria for 30 years, and at that time Bashar was not being groomed to be the next president. His older brother was, Basil. Every Syrian dreams of the day that they will go back and try to rebuild what has been destroyed. Every Syrian American dreams of a time that they can go back and walk peacefully in the streets that they got to know, and eat in the restaurants that provide Syrian cuisine, and listen to the music of Syria. It looks like it's going to be a long way from now.
We begin with me as a 4-year-old child who came from Pakistan. My father wanted a better life for us. He wanted us to go to school, and I came to America, and I remember being called Hindu and being called all these names because kids just didn't understand my culture. And I would be like embarrassed if my mother, who wore the headscarf, would take me to school. As a child, you don't know because all you want to do is fit in. And I remember I was in 4th grade and I had a crush on this Greek boy. His name was Leo something. It's a long last name. And I remember thinking to myself, why even look at him, Naila, when you know you're going to marry someone else? Imagine what that's like for someone in the 4th grade. So in October of 2004, I went to Pakistan. They said, oh, it's your cousin's wedding. You know, that was the trick to get me there, that we were going for my cousin's wedding. And then next thing you know, January 5th came along, and that's the day my whole life changed.
I think as a Muslim American, as an Arab American who has grown up in the United States his whole life, I was born and raised here from parents who immigrated from Syria. Now, I think one of the main reasons why I wanted to come down here and speak about my story is because I am one of the very few Arabs or Muslim Americans who decided to branch off from being a doctor or engineer or lawyer and do something completely out of the norm. And so right now I'm a videographer. I've been doing video, telling stories for about 9 to 10 years now. I'm not in it for the money, and I'm not in it for the fame. I'm in it for the next generation that is to come. The next generation out there who are like my brother or my sister or even my kids. I want them to grow up knowing that they can be something that they want, that they can put their mind to. You can be a firefighter. You can be someone that wants to be on the news, someone that wants to do something in PR, communications. Anything that you can put your mind to, you should go for it.
My dad is Palestinian, and my mom is half Russian and half Iranian. It's interesting because my grandmother is actually Jewish, and my grandfather is Muslim. He's Shia Muslim. And so then my dad and his parents are Sunni Muslim. So in addition to the different cultural like practices, there's also differences in like religious sects. What I've realized as I've grown up is that kind of one culture and just religious sect kind of like was more prominent in my life. So definitely the Palestinian culture and practices I've learned way more about than Iranian culture or even Russian culture. That's probably what I've learned the least about is Russian culture. And then I am a Sunni Muslim too. So yeah, I've just realized that I didn't really have the opportunity to learn as much as I would have liked to about Iranian culture, Russian cultures, as well as like Judaism and Shia Islam too.
Okay. So what we're hearing there are a few excerpts from some really, really powerful stories, obviously, from earlier on. And I think we would refer to these particular excerpts as sort of being sort of the final product. So there's a longer process that gets us from having somebody in the storytelling booth to having this sort of polished version. And Amy, I would love it if you could talk a little bit about that process. And I'd also love to know sort of your perspective on StoryCorps' sort of culture of interviewing, because I know it's a very specific approach.
Well, I'm going to start with the culture because it is specific. It's not exactly oral history. And it's remained the same over since the beginning, the 15 years of StoryCorps itself. It's an intense focus on collecting, sharing, and preserving people's stories. The interview session is the heart, as you described. It's 40 minutes. I don't know why that's the key. 40 minutes of recording, two people talking to each other. It's a conversation, and there is a facilitator that is in the room, whether it's a virtual room like we're in right now or the actual in-person booth, who is manning the equipment and taking notes for the Library of Congress, for John's space, keywords and all that, and guiding, being what we call the first listener. If someone 100 years from now listens to this interview, what did you start talking about that you didn't finish? Maybe ask a question and say, whatever happened to that? You went off on a tangent. Can we come back and just finish that piece? We're not doing the interview. We're not asking the question as the facilitator. So that's sort of the guide. And then where it goes from there, if it's going to be produced, we may put extra notes for production. And that's really a subjective stance that the facilitator has to say the story may have a beginning, a middle, and end. It has something extremely unique about it that maybe has not been told. From a participant's point of view, it's not somebody who's been in the media a lot. It's not a story that you may have ever heard before, and maybe this needs to get out. But we also have a unique aspect in oral history. It's not really oral history. We pull from various methodologies and disciplines like journalism, anthropology, and oral history. This facilitated participant interview is, it's known in oral history. Two people who know each other, one interviews the other, it's facilitated, it's still two people talking to each other, but there's the staff person who's in there that is making it something different. We're clarifying things, pressing the participants, and sometimes there to get good tape, which is a little bit different. The other thing we're trying to do is use oral history to make a difference. And so we also survey people who listen to the stories and those who come in to record them to see if they're making any measurable impact on their lives. So we're doing surveys. And some of the things that we have found out, 96% of people who take an online survey report that their exposure to StoryCorps content helped them better understand and or empathize with people who are different from them. And 78% of NPR survey respondents said StoryCorps helped them think of people different from themselves as an important part of society. And so in that way, it's making more of a lasting impact than journalism or oral history can, we hope.
Awesome. Thank you so much. John, I want to go to you and try to kind of understand the sort of relationship between Library of Congress and StoryCorps, and also sort of in a more general sense, because I know you're with the Center for American Folklife. How does the archival process work on your end, and how has that process, either developed or stayed the same?
Okay. Well, StoryCorps started in 2003, I think was when the first sort of booth was opened. By 2004, StoryCorps and the Library of Congress, the American Folklife Center as the formal unit within it, established an agreement where we would be the long-term archival repository of the full 40-minute conversations. So those of you who have listened on NPR or just listened to the excerpts, that Andrew just played, you get the short bits. We get the full long interview along with all the metadata that Amy mentioned, the who, what, where, when, and why, not just what's in the story, but where was it recorded? Because the story might be about Syria or about, Chicago, but maybe it was recorded in Wisconsin for some reason. Like, knowing all of that is going to help people who listen to it 100 years from now. So we get all of that information. And we bundle it together into a collection. So we have the StoryCorps collection. That relationship has been in place since 2004, and it's gone through various changes related to archival process to some extent, as StoryCorps has changed, right? As they've moved from the signature booths and the Airstream trailers to the mobile phone-based app, and then now to StoryCorps Connect. So there's been different iterations of how StoryCorps has done its job of getting these incredibly poignant stories, but I think to Amy's point, these like first-person experience stories, right? It's not always oral history, but it's about someone's lived experience, and that's vital to what we document at the American Folklife Center. So, so we've been with StoryCorps since the beginning almost, and continue to meet with them on a rather regular basis to talk about, sort of, I won't say boring because they're not boring, but but the technical ingest, things, the metadata, the sort of what do we need to know that's behind the thing, such that people can find the stories and come learn about them. And I'll say that one of the most impactful things, and we've also been a point of access for a while too. So you can come to the reading room at the American Folklife Center and listen to a StoryCorps interview. One of the most meaningful things for me is when I'm sitting on the reference desk and a family comes in and they say, oh, we want to listen to the interview that our grandfather recorded. And the impulse is to say, well, you have a copy of it because StoryCorps gives a copy to everyone. But there's something about coming into the Library of Congress and hearing your voice or your family's voice, family member's voice or a friend's voice in the library that I think speaks to both the mission of MALA and the mission of StoryCorps as well, to get this diverse collection of voices, perspectives, experiences, sort of into the national record. And I think that's what's really vital. So our archival process is to, ingest this born digital stuff. And if you look at a graph of our collection growth shortly after 2000, so when born digital audio becomes sort of a real thing around the world, our graph goes from like this to this in terms of the number of things we bring in every year, and StoryCorps accounts for a significant number of that. So Amy mentioned the number of interviews they do in Chicago each year, but you multiply that around the booths around the country, and then with the introduction of the app. So we ingest a lot of born digital content. And then we ingest all the metadata, as I said, as well, and work to make those available in perpetuity. As long as the libraries are on, we're going to make sure this stuff is here. And so I don't see us going anywhere anytime soon.
We certainly hope not. I think like one point you bring up here, which is really interesting, and I think which each of us is thinking about a lot, especially now given this sort of socially distanced, remote, virtual life that a lot of us are living, is we have the stories and they're archived and they're, in this place, but then also finding ways to keep those stories alive and continue to make them relevant and accessible and impactful for people once they're archived. And so I'd be actually curious to kind of hear from everybody on what do we think, given the circumstances that we're living in right now, what needs to happen in order for us to continue to be able to do that? And Flex, I'd love to go to you, just because I know MALA has done in the past, several programs, in-person programs in Chicago, with this sort of intention of bringing these stories to life, bringing them to an in-person audience, and trying to make that impact felt.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to when we first started, I mean, we used a lot of design thinking, tools, and we had a lot of questions, how can I, as a Muslim, own my own narrative? How can I showcase the diversity in our community? How can I, do so and on? How can I connect with like-minded individuals in my community? And it all came down to, honestly, is storytelling. And with StoryCorp, the stories, once they're collected, archived, we also edit them, and you get a 5-minute, radio edit. And when someone listens to their story in that format for the first time, and they hear themselves as if they were listening to someone else on the radio, they're beside themselves, because they realize that, hey, you know what, this is really powerful. But if you go to the beginning of the process, when you ask that individual to share their story, first thing they will say is, well, I don't have a story. And I really, you should interview someone a lot more interesting than me. Find a celebrity. I'm like, no, let's just have a conversation. So that's what it all comes down to, is that's my sell. It's just a conversation between two friends. But once they hear their story, and the 5-minute edit, and it's posted on MALA's page, and we've taken a lot of care, Zainab and I and our co-founders, to make sure that that person is proud of their story, and they get a magazine, feel. It's as if it's a HuffPost, feel. So now, that individual is looking at their digital presence, and it's changed, because when you Google that person, their MALA story comes up. So the next thing is, going back to what John said, we're always looking at the metadata, right? And I'm a tech guy, I have a computer science background. So I'm constantly looking at the data, and I see, okay, well, you mentioned, 20 times that you have a passion in photography. Okay, how about you help us create a photography event? Or would you like to sit on a panel and just talk about what you love and photography? And that's how we've been able to bring, these stories to life through, live events. And we've done them at WeWorks. I mean, I've done, with MALA, over 200 events at WeWorks all across, the nation. Partnering up with Malala and her organization and Participant Media, we were able to borrow the mobile recording tools from Storycorp, and every time we showed Malala's film, we'd encourage people to share their own story and talk about their own adversities and how they triumphed, through it. And Zainab and I would just take turns after the screening and, interview people. And that's how we, scaled the organization. This is how we brought these stories to life. And 5 years later, we're looking at the number of leaders that we've activated in our own, community, people that in the past would not see themselves in leadership, positions, and we're very proud of our work that we've done.
Thank you, Flex. Yeah, John, I think, speaking of this sort of in-person programming and how to bring these stories to life in person, we did a really interesting event in partnership at the Library of Congress a few years back. Wondering if you wanted to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, as I mentioned in my intro, that was one of the first things I had the privilege of working on in my brand new job at the Library of Congress. And I got a phone call from Zainab and took it as I'm a public servant. So I take the phone calls, and soon we were planning this listening event at the Library of Congress. So we were going to invite the public, as well as storytellers who had participated in the Muslim American Journeys project to come into the library, listen to some excerpts, but more importantly for me, I think, is to hear the storytellers talk about their motivation for being involved. Why did they step up to the call that you all put out to come share their stories through the StoryCorps platform? And that was so powerful, and it was a great event because it was in a room overlooking the Capitol, and it was just really lovely to bring all these people together for something that was unique. I mean, the Folklife Center has so many audio collections, thousands and thousands of hours of audio from 1890 to last week. We rarely invite the public into our space to listen to it with us and with the people who had contributed to it. So it was a multifaceted and really lovely event that I would love to do more of once we can get back together in the same room. But yeah, I mean, that was just so fun, Zainab, and so it's such a compelling thing.
It kind of goes into what you were saying earlier, John, is that there's something very special about knowing that your story is being housed into the National Library of Congress. And when you actually walk into the building, like you said, and be like, can I listen to my story? Or can I listen to my family member's story? It's very powerful. And knowing that your story is archived and preserved for generations to come, that's big, and I think for our community members, it's imperative because with StoryCorps' unique method of collecting stories, with the archiving and preservation at the Library of Congress, and MALA's mission, it's really about autonomy and empowering people to share their narrative, what they want to talk about, their identity, their triumphs, their adversities, like Flex had said. And so the listening party event that we did at the National Library of Congress, that was very powerful because we had a panel of storytellers that shared their experience and what it was like. I still remember 3 years, into MALA and with this partnership, there was a particular individual that was like, okay, I've listened to all the stories and now I'm ready to share mine. And it's like I said, it's a very catharsis, like it provides a lot of catharsis for a lot of individuals, and myself included. I think the first time that I shared my story was just a couple months back when we were testing the virtual platform out. And I've always been the story collector, not the storyteller. So it is a very unique experience. And knowing that it's housed at the National Library of Congress, it gives people a lot of pride. It gives people pride in their heritage, their background, gives empowerment, autonomy over what they want to talk about themselves, what they want to preserve about their families, generations, their heritage. And that's really what our mission has been. And since COVID, I think that there's definitely a lot more of a need for empathy, for connection, for wanting to share. And that's what we have been doing. We do have a waiting list for stories to be recorded. That's one of the challenges, is that obviously it's not something that you can fast forward. There's a lot of time, there's a lot of cultivation, there's a lot of, there's a very large psychological component also that involves many people have never shared their stories, like Flex had said. So it's unique, it's a amazing experience. And towards the end of the webinar, we can share the information of how you can get involved and be, recorded virtually as well. So that's kind of my take on that event, and where I kind of see it going too, because like I said, I think there is just a lot more of a need for connection and empathy and sharing our experiences now after COVID, and, social unrest in our nation. I just think that people want to connect.
Absolutely. Thank you, Zainab. And I just want to break here for a second and remind folks who are joining us on Zoom that if you have any questions for any of our panelists, please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box, and we're going to set aside a little bit of time towards the end and address any audience experience or questions, excuse me. So Amy, I want to come to you in a second because I'm curious about the sort of online transition to storytelling. But before I do that, one of the things, Zainab, that you bring up is the power of storytelling to provide a really unique cultural exchange. And I want to bring Flex into this conversation also because Flex, I know as an African American, as an immigrant, you have postured a lot of your storytelling efforts to try to spotlight these sort of cross-cultural perspectives. Can you say a little bit about how you approach that and what your own experience has been?
Yeah, absolutely. So similar to Zainab's story, her dad passed away. My grandfather passed away as well around the same time. And I also had the regret of not recording his story because he was an incredible man. He was Minister of Finance in Somalia, and someone who helped shape, the person that I am today. And when I came to America as an immigrant, my first job was on the west side of Chicago, and that is a predominantly African American, neighborhood. And I learned about the different Americas. The word segregation was not even in my vocabulary, and I had the honor and privilege of working in tech at the time as a 19-year-old and building computer labs and networks, to connect people. So my biggest joy was having, people that I have shared heritage, with as an African, see, and watch videos at the time through Yahoo on other, Africans, and just to show people, our common heritage and, culture. And recently, in the wake of, the protests and the killing of, George Floyd, is more important than ever to talk to get, the stories out of African Americans. And in my case, it gives me a great honor to work with Storycorp, because when we work with Storycorp, we're not only archiving the stories at the Library of Congress, we're also archiving the stories at the Smithsonian African American Museum, for heritage and culture. And I was able to visit the museum in Washington, D.C., and it was just made me, really proud. And MALA has been very much in the front lines on hosting events on Black History Month, on honoring, folks from the African American community, such as Malik Yusuf, who's a Grammy Award winner, and Dr. Ibrahim Asek, who archives and collects stories for the Whitney Plantation. And that was really powerful because we were the first Muslim organization to work with him, and we were honored by Mayor Latoya Cantrell. So we have a lot more work to do in that area, and it's important for people to understand that Muslims are not a monolith. African Americans are not a monolith. And the more stories we can capture and share and amplify, it's going to help heal the wounds that we have right now as a nation.
Absolutely. Amy, I know that StoryCorps works with all kinds of different communities. I'm curious, what have been some of the benefits for StoryCorps for working with other arts and cultural organizations or communities in the past? And is that, how do you see those sort of relationships developing moving forward?
Well, our goal is to make this experience that you've been talking about accessible to everyone. And the way we do that is by partnering with organizations like MALA, especially those that serve diverse populations. So if we can help you celebrate the voices and the milestones in your community, that's how we operate, basically. We serve the public, and then we serve nonprofits and other organizations in the communities that we serve, because you serve as the bridge to your community, and partnering with you allows us to reach the people and the stories we otherwise would not be able to reach or to record. So that's basically how that helps us, and then in turn helps you. I did want to jump on something that John said earlier, though, because I think it's important for people to be able to hear those stories and to hear other people's stories. Times have changed so much that it used to be the only way to hear the stories was to go to the Library of Congress and walk in and do exactly what John said and ask to hear somebody's story. We used to hand them out on CD, and then we would give people a digital download when that time came. And if Grandpa passed away, who knows where that CD went or where that digital download went. We know what our email inbox looks like. And it took years, several years, 3, maybe 4 years, but all of the interviews that have a particular release to them, if you said, I want this up there, are now in an online archive. And that was a lot of work for our recording and archive folks to do. So not only can you go physically to the Library of Congress, but you can go to archive.storycorp.org and listen to the full 40-minute interviews that were recorded not only in our booth, but the New York booth, the Atlanta booth, the San Francisco booth, which used to be around, the mobile recording booths, and all those that were recorded on our app. So they're up there now, and that was a long time coming.
Amazing. Yeah, and I should also mention, just for anybody watching, we'll be sending out, we'll send out a follow-up message to everybody who registered and include all of these links so that you can individually explore the archives, even, maybe sign up to tell your own story and see all the different ways that we can kind of engage with this.
I just quickly want to jump in, Andrew, very quick. Thanks to the partnership with StoryCorps and the American Folklife Center and the Library of Congress, MALA has been one of the first organizations to preserve, archive, and collect oral histories from Muslim Americans. And we have been, for 4 consecutive years now, actual participants at the prestigious Oral History Association conference. And this year, it is being held virtually. It will be online. We will be sharing the link for that as well once we get the full schedule. And we will be having a panel of our storytellers. This year's theme and topic is bridge building through storytelling with communities. So it's going to be, like Flex had said, it's an ongoing project for us. It's something that we definitely want to continue scaling and expanding on. And this year we have been recipients of several grants, Field Foundation, Chicago Community Trust, to continue collecting stories from marginalized communities, particularly African American Muslim communities. So that's something that I'm very proud of for our team, for our community, to come forward and be like, I want to be a part of this, and I want my story heard and my voice heard. So just kind of wanted to share that out there.
Thank you, Zainab. Wonderful. Well, we have a few minutes left. I'd like to, if we can, answer a couple of audience questions. And again, anybody who is joining us on Zoom right now, please feel free to type in any questions you have for the panelists or just in general into the Q&A box there. This first question we have is, how did modern technology affect traditional and folk storytelling? And what is the most impactful modern tool for digital storytelling you can think of? I kind of want to go around the horn. Amy, do you want to take a stab at this first?
I can quickly say that it took about a month after quarantine for StoryCorps to actually invent two methods of recording remotely, because we could not record. You used to have to be in the same room literally to do any kind of StoryCorps recording. And we have now virtual recording rooms that allow people in different locations, different cities, different states, different countries to record interviews with each other. I know MALA's been taking wonderful advantage of that. They still are the same methodology of recording, but it's our own virtual recording rooms. One is a do-it-yourself method, sort of like our app on steroids. But this is the first time you can record a family member or friends who are not in the same room with you, and that's called StoryCorps Connect. You can Google that and do it yourself. And the other is just like what I described before, the facilitated virtual interview. It's more complex, but it mimics the same experience you'd have in a live booth setting. And we are also now able to do that with people. We're recording actually this afternoon with a recently re-entering person who doesn't have a computer. So we can call out to them and they can use their phone. So they can have a computer, Wi-Fi, microphone, and be all fancy like we're doing right now, but we're also making it adaptable for people who don't have those situations. And, it was just, our IT and tech people and digital people stepped up because we had to, and we've now been doing hundreds of interviews that way. So I think that's pretty cool.
Definitely pretty cool is an understatement, I think. Cool. John, what about from your perspective in terms of archival and access to stories? What's useful digital tools or even, I guess, like complications maybe that would arise from new technological developments?
Well, I mean, certainly the first part of that question, modern technology affecting traditional folk storytelling. I mean, it's a huge question. There's a huge answer, but modern technology absolutely impacts what we think of as traditional storytelling contexts, which are usually face-to-face with a small audience. I mean, this is from a folklorist perspective, but it's about that connection between the people who are hearing the story and the person who's telling it. So recording locks that connection into a specific medium and a specific way of accessing it. I think I mentioned some of our earliest ethnographic recordings are from 1890, and they were done by a white anthropologist who was visiting the Passamaquoddy in northern Maine. Captured very much in a mode of colonial sort of anthropology. Lock those stories down. We didn't know a lot about them because there wasn't a lot of metadata collection back then, but modern technology has allowed us to deliver high-res transfers of those to Passamaquoddy elders and cultural officers who have worked with the material to understand more robustly what it is and reclaim it as their own. I mean, it rightly is. So modern technology runs the gamut, but it absolutely impacts storytelling in good and bad ways, I think. And I want to put it in a black and white. But I would say I'm echoing what Amy talked about. I mean, one of the most impactful technologies, modern tools right now, is VoIP, or Voice over Internet Protocol. I mean, it's what allows Zoom to work. It's what allows anything to work, so we can tell stories, whether we're recording them or not, from afar through digital realms with family, with friends, with people. I know that a colleague of mine who works at the Perkins Center for the Arts in New Jersey, she's the president of the Black Storytellers Association. They're running like a mini festival right now using all these technologies, but to connect storytellers to audiences around the country and around the world, whereas otherwise it might be the people who could go to New Jersey to the Perkins Center to buy a ticket to go hear the stories, right? It's a changing world, and I think it's useful to be aware of all the tools, embrace them, but also understand their limitations too.
Absolutely. Flex, you have a tech background, and I know you're like always keyed in on whatever new technological tools. Flex called me up the other day and was like, "Man, there's this new organizing app. Like you and me, we both have to get profiles. We've got to try it out. It's still in beta, but it's going to be awesome." So that's kind of coming from that place, Flex. I mean, what do you see as like long-term, short-term impacts of modern technology on as an interviewer gathering these stories and building community? How do you see that?
Well, I'm a lifelong Deloitte alum, and I still have access to all their resources. So I'm up to date with what's coming up, and the keyword is beta. I'm always looking to improve our process, and hence the new title of being Chief Experience Officer is I want to maintain the experience that you had coming to a MALA event. And with the help of our partners like Storycorp and the Library of Congress, coming into a virtual booth. So technology is evolving, and the pandemic just accelerated the process. It was just a catalyst, because we had the technology, we just were forced to use it, and now it's not so bad. Obviously, at the beginning there was a lot of there was a learning curve, but dropping stories now on IGTV and also connecting with the next generation is really important, because the next generation is on TikTok and they're creating art through their phone. They're creating social justice initiatives through those TikTok videos. The video starts by, oh hey, here's a tutorial on makeup. Oh, since you're here, by the way, let me tell you a little bit about what's happening in the world, which is awesome, because then a discussion ensues in the comments. And we're able to measure the level of engagement that we have with folks through our social media. So as technology evolves, we evolve with it. And like I said, we've built digitally first. So it was a lot easier for us to pivot our programming 100% online.
Absolutely. And Zainab, I know a little bit of a different question for you, but you have a psychology background, and as we're talking about new technologies and how they impact the way stories are told and shared, and part of that I think is how people connect with each other, and how that storytelling and the trust that needs to happen there can be facilitated. I mean, just really briefly, what do you see as pros, cons to these sort of developing digital connections?
I think very similar, I'll be very fast with this, is what Amy had said, is accessibility for people to be able to access the technology. One of the things that we're very proud of with MALA is that we're able to get a very large range of demographics to be able to share our stories. So when we're talking about age ranges, we're going from 18 all the way up to 85. And one of the things I would also love to do is to push for the elder generation to be able to archive their stories and share their stories, so that way we have a place where we can have this wonderful collection of people from all different backgrounds being able to share their story, and that have accessibility to be able to. I'm not that tech savvy, but I know with StoryCorps, it's been very user friendly. Obviously, going into that booth is such a wonderful experience. And we kind of can't have that right now, but the virtual platform that we've been doing StoryCorps interviews has been very streamlined, very user friendly, and it's a wonderful experience.
Thank you, Zainab. And we have just one more audience question here, which Flex, I'm going to send your way. And the question is, how do you share these stories with generally, I guess, low income or marginalized communities, specifically communities of color, who don't have access to the internet? And then I think the second part of that question is, how do we posture our storytelling projects in a way that avoids cultural appropriation, and which appropriately honors, the indigenous roots of indigenous populations, Africans, and Black Americans specifically?
Can I quickly jump in for that question? That's a wonderful question. And a lot of Muslim Americans, what MALA has been able to do is reach out to minority groups within the Muslim American community. So African American communities, Black Muslim American stories are very different from their histories are very much tied in with the civil rights movement in America. We have a very wonderful compilation of stories from the Bosnian American community, from the Bora community, from the Ahmadiyya community. And so this requires a lot of trust building. This requires somebody sees one of their family members' stories online or featured, and then they're like, you know what, I want to share mine. And it's been, that's the hard work and the trust that we've built with our community for the past 5 years, is to provide that autonomy and that platform for them to be able to share what they want to.
I would like to add that trust is a huge factor, which is why we partner with organizations like MALA, which also allows our public service recording to be free. And I think that allows it to be able to be reachable for most communities. If an organization is not a nonprofit and it doesn't reach marginalized communities, we have to send them through our custom services department, and then it is not free. And I think this helps answer that question, is how we do reach these communities. We keep it absolutely free for them to be able to tell their stories. We try to build trust, and if they're not comfortable with what might happen to their story, we totally are hands off and leave it to the organization to work with them, and still there's no push.
Yeah, and I can just echo all of that, and just add a little bit more in terms of how MALA does things. We can't be everywhere all the time, so we rely on our partners, and one of our biggest partnerships is the Chicago Cultural Alliance. And the Chicago Cultural Alliance has an incredible list of members and cultural centers that are spread out all over Chicago. And by connecting with these, communities, that's how we honor these stories. And I remember, John, when we were at the Oral History Association event, and on the panel, you said something that really struck me, was as the Library of Congress, you are also a federal, entity, and the federal government, per se, has not been necessarily kind to minorities and African Americans and Native Americans. So the need for MALA and an organization like us to help, restore, that trust, and show that, we're able to, do that work through bridge building. But a lot of it, what it all comes down to, is having that individual own their narrative and control their narrative. MALA does not at any point try to take away from that person's experience. If they see themselves as a victim, they're a victim. If they see themselves as a survivor, they're a survivor. They have complete ownership and autonomy of their narrative. And for myself, being of African American, heritage, I'm African from Africa. But there are people that are descendants of slaves in this country, and their stories have not been honored the way it's supposed to be honored. And myself being here as an immigrant is the result of the Civil Rights Act. So I have a personal debt to pay for all those folks, both Muslim and non-Muslim, that march to make sure that I have the opportunities that I have, today. And that's why we made sure with my fellows to go visit a plantation, because until you're there, you really do not know the true history of America and on whose backs was the country, built. So we're very proud of the work that we're doing, but we can't do it without the community. We can't do it without our partners. We can't do it without our donors. So all of this is just us coming together and just reaching out and working together. And it's just a beautiful thing to see, because right now, social media is a very toxic environment, but the way MALA has seen social media is it's a tool, and we can use it as a tool for good. And we've done that, and we can look at the data and the analytics and the insights on the back end, because you can see that those folks might not necessarily have the same views as you. But once they look at your story and they hone in on the human element and realize that we're not so different. And the pandemic also has showed us that we need to stop looking at things as, as problems that are, nations' problems or race, issues, because at the end of the day, we have to solve a lot of these issues as species. So once you start, seeing someone as a human and you stop fearing the other, then you're able to have a conversation. And MALA's been able to do that through our events and showing films and engaging in arts and culture events. And it's not an easy process, and we have a long way to go. But the only way that we do it is by doing the event, getting the feedback, and just improving constantly.
Thank you, Flex. And I think this is a good place for us to wrap up. And I want to respect everybody's time. Before we do that, I'd like to just give each of our panelists the opportunity to just very quickly in like a minute, any closing thoughts, and then also if you could let our audience know any interesting initiatives you have coming up this fall, or any other ways that folks can engage. And again, for people who tuned in, and I suspect some people had to hop off, we'll be sending around links as well following. But Amy, can I start with you?
Sure. I think the last thing I want to add is that for anyone who wants to record their story, StoryCorps recently created a new Muslim initiative. It's called the American Pathways Anwar Collection of Muslim Voices, to uplift and celebrate the stories of Muslim people. It's named in memory of StoryCorps producer Lina Anwar, who passed away in March at the age of 30 from leukemia. So anyone who identifies as Muslim on their data sheet or during their interview can participate in that. And we're really proud to offer that. It's only about a month old now.
Thank you, Amy. John?
Yeah, I'll just reiterate my invitation at the beginning. The American Folklife Center is available for people to contact us, learn more about what we do, what resources we offer as a public institution. Everything we offer is free and available to those who can come on site and who can't. I mean, that's important too. I'll just say a really fun initiative we've been running since June, and we're running to September, is every Wednesday on our Facebook page at noon, we premiere a short video recorded by a folk or traditional artist in their home during the COVID pandemic time. So we're supporting folk and traditional artists as best we can, giving them some funds to perform for us, and they're fantastic, incredible, diverse array of musicians from all over the country and all over the world too.
Oh, that's awesome. I did not know that was going on. I'll have to tune in. Is it every day during the week?
Every Wednesday at noon.
Okay, every
Eastern
Wednesday.
time.
Amazing. Let's see, Flex. Any closing thoughts? What should we look forward to from MALA in the fall?
Yeah, I've said a lot, so I'll keep this very short. We are currently finalizing some of our programming for the fall. So if there is a topic that you're passionate about, reach out to us at info@malanational.org. And if you want to share your story with us and StoryCorp, would be happy to schedule that as well.
Thanks, Flex. And Zainab, I want to close with you. Any closing thoughts or anything we should be looking forward to this fall?
Absolutely. Well, this fall is going to be tough, and it's a polarizing time. And I just want everybody to know that with MALA, as I've reiterated before, we're non-political, we're non-theological. It's very challenging to do during this time. However, what we focus is on communities, our community members, and having pride in our heritage. So be proud. We're here, and I want to thank everybody for their support, especially StoryCorps and the Library of Congress, because we would not have been able to be where we are in 5 years without their support. So thank you.
Thank you, Zainab. And on behalf of everybody here, thank you to everybody who joined and contributed to the conversation, asked questions. We hope to see you all soon in future virtual programming. We'll have a full recording of the session sent out, as well as links to some of the initiatives that we discussed here. And, you know, we hope everybody is well and healthy and staying safe and enjoying the last few weeks of summer. So thank you all for joining. Thank you to all of our panelists.
Thank you. It was an honor.
And we will see you all sooner rather than later. Have a wonderful night.
Take care, everyone. Stay well.